Welcome, everybody. Today's webinar is part of the Unpacking Coaching webinar series that the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations puts on. My name is Mary Louise Hemmeter, and I'm just going to be hosting this webinar today. And of course, today's topic is especially timely in that we're talking about coaching in a virtual world. We will refer to some materials today during the webinar, and these will all be on the website under the web page, on the web page for this webinar under a related resources section. Also, after the webinar, you'll get an email evaluation from us. And we really hope you'll fill this out because we seriously use the data that we get from those evaluations in helping us plan the next webinars. At the end of the survey, so the evaluation survey, there will be a certificate of attendance that you can print or download. So today we have two really great speakers with us, Megan Von der Ems and Adrienne Golden, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then they will get started.
I can start while Megan's figuring out her mute. My name is Adrienne Golden, and I'm a doctoral student working with ML Hemmeter at Vanderbilt. And my research interests are around coaching teachers and finding effective and efficient models for coaching. And I'm currently coaching teachers around implementing the pyramid model in their classroom. And so I've had some experience with this virtual coaching. So I'm really excited to be here with you all this afternoon.
Hi, I'm Megan Von der Ems. I'm from the University of South Florida, and I just demonstrated all the fun that can happen when you're coaching in a virtual environment. Technology problems do happen, and we just roll with them. So I switched to my mouse. My keyboard would not accept any movement. So we appreciate your flexibility as we go through this, and that's the only hiccup hopefully we're going to have today. So during this time together, we are going to be focusing on all those considerations for virtual coaching. Many of us, as Adrienne and I are both coaches and supporting other people in the coaching process, have really kind of brainstormed and thought about all of the different considerations for virtual coaching. It's not exhaustive. It's this kind of remote coaching has been a learning experience for so many of us. So we want to share some of the lessons learned and considerations that we found successful in this remote coaching environment that we're in. And we're going to be framing it all in that we can still try to emphasize and maintain that practice-based coaching cycle when we're implementing pyramid model practices. And we're going to really focus on this idea of coaching remotely, knowing that the coaching that we're doing might not be either or of these situations. It might be both. So right now, coaches are supporting teachers and early childhood educators where the teacher is in the classroom, children are in the classroom, but that the coach is in a remote, the coach is remote and not able perhaps to be in the classroom to complete that in-person live coaching. But we're also supporting teachers who are providing e-learning or virtual instruction. And so we're going to be kind of talking about these two different situations, but we recognize that the situation is fluid and that many coaches are doing both of these options. So they're supporting teachers maybe in one program where some teachers are providing in-person instruction while other teachers in that program might be providing e-learning or virtual instruction or hybrid, which many teachers are doing right now. So we want to recognize that we're hopefully going to give information that can be applicable to kind of all the different coaching scenarios that are happening right now. So the one thing that as we're reflecting on coaching, and I love coaching, I love being in classrooms and supporting teachers, that it's really easy to fall into a pattern of, if I can't do live coaching or if I can't be in person, how can I replicate it or how can I duplicate this process? And when we step back and we really think about how coaching is meant to be supportive and to guide teachers in implementing new practices, that a strong message that we can give ourselves is to really focus on what we can do in around our coaching supports, and that try not to make something coaching virtually something that it's not or can't be. And by focusing on what we can do, we can still provide those powerful coaching strategies and build those supportive relationships so that teachers can focus on those social emotional teaching practices, especially as we're thinking about how can we implement pyramid model practices both in the classroom and now in these kind of virtual kind of distant learning environments. And so that is kind of that first consideration, that we're going to provide some strategies, maybe some ideas, and a coaching tool where we can continue to provide support around those key social emotional practices. We know that children more than ever kind of need those access to good social emotional skill building and practice and connections and relationships that the pyramid model offers. The other kind of essential element that we're going to focus on is this idea of connections, and we're going to talk through this a little more, but we really can focus on our relationship and investing our time and thinking of our time building that relationship with the teacher as an investment, that we need to spend more time than ever building those relationships, getting to know the early childhood educators and professionals that we're supporting to make coaching as successful as possible right now. And that last kind of focus that we can do is we can try our best to implement key components of practice-based coaching, which we know is an effective approach to coaching that leads to improved outcomes for children and for teachers. So we're going to walk through different ways where we can be flexible and creative about how we can still implement those key components of coaching. And as we were reflecting on how do we build relationships, because that is that foundation of practice-based coaching, that collaborative partnership, those building of relationships with the teachers and educators and practitioners we're supporting, the word connections kept coming up as we were talking to coaches and talking to other professionals who support coaches. The idea that the one constant a teacher might have access to in terms of support might be their coach. Schedules are changing. Routines may change within the classroom based on safety procedures and guidelines. They're shifting. Classroom enrollment is shifting, changing on a day-to-day basis. I know we are supporting some classrooms where one day they have 2 children in the classroom and the next day they have 5, and the following week they're up full enrollment. And so all of these variables might be inconsistent. But coaching is one thing that we can provide to teachers that gives them that stable sense of support, in addition to what might exist in their existing program or site. So when we think of it that way, it's easy to imagine how powerful practice-based coaching might be for the coach and for the teacher. And this idea that we need to make more frequent connections makes sense when you think of if we're coaching and I'm coaching in a center or a site or a program. I can stop by a teacher's classroom. I can do a quick check-in. I can leave them a note in their mailbox. I can provide positive feedback frequently in all my interactions. But if now we are doing all of those interactions virtually or remotely, that means more frequent connections. We have to make the time to get to know teachers. We have to make the time to get to know how teachers want to be connected with. And while it sounds like that's something we do anyway, when we're doing coaching, we make sure that we know how the teacher wants us to get in touch with them. It's really powerful right now. I was talking with a coach earlier this week, and she was reflecting on how a teacher missed the group coaching session she had. So we're coaching and we're using groups, and a teacher didn't show up to group. And she's like, I emailed everyone. I was certain that this teacher would be there. This teacher is really good about checking emails and responding through communicating through emails. That's how I always get in touch with this teacher. And we're reflecting after the group, and she reached out to the teacher, and that teacher said, I can't even check, I don't have time to check my email. I got behind, a couple days behind. If I would have checked my email, of course I would have been in group. And that coach realized I need to probably text or call or make those more frequent connections so that I'm not missing something in my relationship. And it was really powerful to see the coach reflect on that. She knew this teacher and had a fantastic relationship with this teacher, but coaching virtually, and this coach is actually on site, but not able to be to all the places she needs to because of all the COVID and safety restrictions, that those connections and the ability to make those little tweaks can go a long way. So we just need to really be kind of thinking about what that extra time may be. And our goal is to try to be our best and to make those frequent connections. And Adrian, you were sharing a kind of anecdote when we were talking about supporting teachers and how we can get to know them and how that can be challenging when we're in this like virtual setting. Do you want to share that little story?
Yeah, so I was just reflecting with Megan on teachers that I work with, and this is my second year with them. So we have a good relationship, but we're used to more of that in person. And so we had to kind of shift and have this awkward, like we're used to kind of being jokey and this chit chat, but we would kind of like talk over each other. And I would start talking and they would start talking, and Zoom wouldn't switch who was talking. So we're missing half and we're kind of charading. But I think little moments like that, we repeat what we say and then we laugh about it, and those kind of little moments and allowing time for that still, because even though it's a little bit awkward, we don't just skip that to get into the content to make it more I talk, then you talk. We still leave time for those moments. And something else I thought of, one of the educational assistants in the class, one of the classrooms I'm in, she likes to get on and turn their camera off. And then when I pop on, she'll turn her camera on and have like a funny mask or a hat on as kind of like a little icebreaker that she'll surprise me with every time. So just kind of working in, and that's on their end, they do that, but just kind of working in those little pieces to kind of make everyone laugh, have it be lighthearted, and that's a really important part and important time to spend in your coaching meetings. But it will be a little bit awkward when you're all talking over one another and getting used to it, but allow time for that because it's important.
Thanks. I thought that was such a powerful way that you shared. Like, it's really about those connections, and it feels different in a virtual, like we're on Zoom right now, it feels different than when you're face to face. But I think that time doing those small moments will pay off as far as continuing to build those strong relationships. So before we get into some further content, this is just a little list of things that are really important considerations. This is not an exhaustive list, but as whether you're coaching virtually or you're thinking in the back of our minds that at any point our program might be providing distance instruction, or the teachers that I'm supporting might be quarantined for those 14 days, as many coaches have found themselves in, having to then use some virtual coaching to maintain that coaching relationship, to really understand and know the policies and procedures, since many of these involve confidentiality, or they might require permissions from the program or site. And these are just questions to ask as you're working with the teacher. Can you as a coach attend virtual learning sessions? Is that available for you to join in a Zoom call or whatever platform they're using to have their virtual lessons? Is it possible to view a recorded call? So if you're doing a live lesson, is that something that can be recorded and the coach could use it later as a focused observation or to provide support and guidance with the teacher? And then if the teacher is still in the classroom and the coach is virtual or remote, what are the technologies available to complete focused observations if that coach cannot be in the classroom? And there's a wide range of technology that exists to capture these observations, from like a tablet recording to some of the more advanced technologies. And I'm not an expert, but I know that some programs are using platforms like Swivel to be able to record that instruction in the classroom. So just taking kind of the inventory of what is the teacher comfortable with using, what access to technology do they have as you're moving forward, with the ability to kind of maintain those key elements of the practice-based coaching components, but being able to adapt those.
Yeah, so we're going to break off into our types of coaching in a second, but I think no matter how you're coaching, a really important piece is that we are still focusing on, as best we can, still implementing those key PBC components, but we definitely want to be flexible and know that we're probably going to need to adapt. So we need to think about how we're going to conduct those focused observations, what that might look like. Megan kind of touched on that, and we're going to touch on that a little bit more in a second. We also need to really consider what pyramid model practices are we going to target around those shared goals and action planning. What's going to make sense? What can we actually support teachers around if they're in person, but we as coaches are virtual? Or what practices make most sense if the teacher is providing virtual instruction? That might change, or it's likely to change the goals that you are setting with teachers. And then really thinking about how to make that reflection and feedback meaningful when you're not there face to face. You can't necessarily do that in the moment feedback, but still making that really meaningful. So we're going to talk through that in a second. Thank you, Megan. So I'm going to start with how to apply the components of the PBC framework when the teacher is providing in-person instruction and the coach is virtual. So the next several slides are going to be the teacher in person and the coach is virtual. So as we were talking about in that connection piece, when the coach is virtual, you're probably going to miss out on a lot of those informal relationship building conversations that you're likely to have when you're in person, whether you're just kind of passing and, in the classroom and you kind of smile or laugh about something that happened, or you throw out a little piece of advice or something. You're going to miss those little pieces when you, the coach, are virtual. So we really want to make a plan for how we're going to build that time into our debrief meetings, or if you can have separate meetings just to make that connection. So you're going to want to leave time for engaging in social conversations. It depends on the coach and the teacher and your relationship, but things, like how was your weekend, or, how was this past week, but thinking of it more from a personal standpoint versus just how have things been going in the classroom. Learning about teachers' likes and dislikes, activities they enjoy leading. How's it been going? What was your favorite activity from last week? So it might not have anything to do with your action plan, but you're just taking that time to show an interest. Your favorite classroom strategies. How do you like to receive feedback? What are your goals for this year? And you can expand those and get even more social, just kind of depending on that relationship, but really just making time to build that connection with the teachers, knowing that you're likely to miss out on some of those little moments during the day. So the first component of PBC that we're going to look at is the focused observation. So the purpose, of course, of our focused observation is to collect data, and we use that data to inform the development of an action plan goal and to inform the supportive and constructive feedback that we give to teachers. So when the coach is observing virtually, we're going to first talk about that kind of needs assessment and then our weekly observation. So a lot of times we think about going in and doing a full Teapot. I can tell you from experience this summer, you can do a full Teapot if you are virtual as the coach. It is not the same, but you can do it. But go into it kind of with a flexible mind and think about sight lines are tricky, sound is tricky. So you might go into it thinking I'm going to watch for 2 hours and do my Teapot, but go into it again, like I said, being flexible. Maybe you shift more towards a running Teapot where you've chosen several of the Teapot items that you're just going to focus on. Maybe you're just going to focus on their schedules and routines and transitions today. So you're not worried about all of the things. Or, you might do it over several observations and just be kind of taking those running notes. The pyramid model checklists or the classroom essentials might also be a really great place to start for a needs assessment. So again, you're focusing more in on something specific. And especially with those classroom essentials, getting the basic universal practices in place is probably a really good place to start. And you're focused in on a smaller chunk of practices versus worrying about, can I see the whole classroom for a whole day? So then we shift to those weekly observations. And as Megan mentioned, there might be different ways that you can do that. So maybe you're able to have the teacher set up a tablet or a laptop and have Zoom up. So maybe you can kind of be live, if you will, even though you're not in person and you're watching things as they unfold. Or maybe you can ask the teachers to record their large group lesson for the day and upload that or send that to you somehow. And then following up with the teacher is going to be really important. As I mentioned, and we're going to talk about it in a couple minutes around reflection and feedback too, but especially when sight lines and sound are more difficult. And if you're not able to hear all the teachers or see everything, you're going to want to build some time into your debrief meetings to follow up with teachers and gather more information from them to kind of inform your observation as well. So then we have the next piece. So now we've done our focused observation and we've collected some data. So now we want to set some goals. So even when you're not in person, you still want to make sure, of course, that your goals are really data driven. So we want to be using all of the data that we've collected from our needs assessments and our focused observations to help the teacher narrow down some goals that they want to work on. I think that focusing on establishing procedures and routines is a really great place to start. We know that generally speaking, but especially now when there are so many more routines or pieces to routines we're not used to, that could be a really great place to start and somewhere that you can pretty easily, I think, support teachers even when you, the coach, are virtual. And so thinking about that, keeping that in mind, it's going to be important to identify goals that are feasible for you to support from a distance. So when you're thinking about individualization, this has come up in some of our meetings with our coaches. Individualization is a really hard thing to support when you're virtual. It's extremely important. So I would not do that. But I would make sure that if you're going to do an individualization goal, you have another goal that you can reliably and consistently see during your virtual observations. One way around the individualization piece with observing, you might ask the teachers to take a video of that specific child or that specific routine and send it to you versus trying to be live and kind of at a distance and seeing across the room a child do something. So that might be a way around it, but just be mindful about which goals you're working on and trying to make sure that if you do have some goals that are harder to support remotely, that you also have goals that are easier to observe. So you feel like you at least have that balance. You're not always relying on the teacher to report back to you how things are going. So just having that balance, I think, will be really helpful. And then follow the teacher's lead. So of course, this is really a hallmark of PBC, but it's really important given the added stressors that teachers are under right now. So some teachers might need or want to focus on those universal practices for a really extended period of time, and they might not be ready to move on to those more targeted social emotional instruction practices, and that's completely fine. Some teachers might be really aware of the rules around social distancing and sharing of materials, for example, and that might make them a little bit hesitant to embed those social opportunities and teach those social skills. They might not quite know how. So just be really understanding with teachers and help them to problem solve around how they can still follow the guidelines, they can keep children safe, and they can still embed some social opportunities. So just being really aware that teachers are going to be in very different places, might need more time, they might need to move slower, they might need a lot more problem solving around how to make things work in a way that they feel like they're still keeping everyone safe and following their school's guidelines. And then the last component of PBC is this reflection and feedback. So as we've mentioned several times, that extra time is going to be really important. So it's important for building those collaborative relationships, but then we get to the reflection and feedback piece. As I mentioned, when you're observing, there's likely to be that you're going to miss things, right? You might not be able to see exactly what's happening across the room. You might be able to hear the lead teacher, but not the educational assistant, but you saw something. So you're going to want to have extra time in your debrief where you can just ask teachers. It's also a great way to add in some reflection on their part. Like, hey, I saw you over in the block center with those two kids, tell me about that. What was happening? How did you feel like that went? So really you're gathering information because you don't know. There might've been a shelf in the way, but you're also providing that teacher with a prompt to reflect on what happened. So that's really a great coaching strategy, but also allows you to kind of fill in the gaps of the information that you were able to glean from your observation. The other thing, emails. When I talked to some other coaches who are pretty consistently, when they were pretty consistently coaching virtually, they were saying that sometimes they needed to use emails to supplement their debrief meetings. They weren't relying solely on email, but sometimes just based on teacher schedules, they were needing to supplement with emails. So if you are going to use email as a coaching strategy, just be really intentional about incorporating your feedback and reflection. Ask the teacher to respond to you, like, hey, send me back an email, a couple, bullet points about how you felt like large group went today. So giving them a chance to reflect back on what's happening. And then when you provide feedback in an email, be very clear with your supportive feedback and very clear with your constructive feedback. Since you're not there, you can't add tone to it. You can't gauge how the teacher is responding to it. So just be really clear about what's supportive, what's constructive, and be really succinct with it so the teacher can really get right to the point. And then using the technology to your advantage. So one thing I loved when I was student teaching, we would have to record ourselves and bring it back and talk about it in class. We'd show our peers and our professors, and we'd have to talk about it. It was super awkward and took a while to get used to, but it was one of the most powerful learning tools I think that I had as I was in my teacher prep program. So use that to your advantage. If you're able to record the Zoom meeting, if you're able to ask teachers to record a certain activity or routine, you watch that and then you can pull 30-second, minute-long clips. And when you're in your debrief meeting, pull those up. Have the teacher watch, have the teacher pull out what went really well during that lesson, what might they want to work on. It's so nice when you're in it, it's really hard to see and really reflect on what's going on. So if you can kind of pull back and watch it unfold, you'll see things that you didn't notice. So if that's the technology that we have to be using, we might as well use it to our advantage. And then it might even be something that you decide to continue with when we're able to all be back in person. And then finally, just be really supportive and understand that everyone is going through a lot right now, and just being there to support. We, of course, need to include some constructive feedback to help push and move teachers along, but make sure that we're just being really supportive of them as well. And if a teacher's really struggling, maybe pull it back a little and really focus on their effort or really small success versus the fact that they're struggling with a larger goal. And lastly, Ashley's going to drop a post a post link in the chat box. But this is just a resource from the Barton Lab at Vanderbilt University that gives teachers some ideas about how to promote social skills when we're also considering social distancing guidelines during learning center time. So it could be, as a coach, you provide this resource to teachers for them to use, or you might explore it yourself and pull out some key ideas that you could work into an action plan, or that you could give as suggestions for teachers to implement.
Thanks, Adrienne. So Adrienne kind of guided us through some of those considerations when the teacher is in the classroom and the coach is remote. There are times when we're coaching right now where we're all remote. So the coach and the teacher are virtual. So we're going to go through those same kind of considerations when you're coaching in this remote situation. And so as Adrienne kind of mentioned, even when the coach is remote and the teachers in person, focused observations, we have to be creative about how we make those work. We have to be even more creative and flexible. I think that key word here is flexible, and really rethinking what constitutes a focused observation. When both the teacher and the coach are remote, scheduling those focused observations presents a whole new set of considerations. So there's the timing, like when those virtual live lessons are being scheduled, the length of virtual lessons. Many teachers are honoring child development, like what's best practice. And some of those virtual calls are brief, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So fitting in focused observations within those parameters just presents some scheduling, rearranging of scheduling, and being flexible of when you're able to complete those observations. And then it's the understanding how coaches can access those live. So if they're gonna jump in to those live lessons, and then are they doing some sort of hybrid model? And so this list of what you're looking at, this focus observation, I was brainstorming with a group of coaches, and we were coming up with what are some ways that you could complete focus observations right now. And I thought this list was really creative and showed that coaching flexibility. So they said we could join a virtual lesson live. We could either join in the Zoom call, which they were using, or this program, the teachers were allowed in the building, but the children were at home. The coaches were able to be socially distanced in the same room with the teacher while she was doing the lesson. So they kind of like sat 6 feet apart, and the coach did her focused observations while a teacher was doing a lesson. This program had the ability to record lessons that the coach could access later. And this program was prepping and they were not doing daily virtual lessons, but they were doing them multiple times a week. And they were doing practice lessons with each other. So the coaches thought this might be an opportunity where we could do an observation of the teacher in that practice and offer reflection and feedback before they got to their actual live lesson, which I thought, if we're thinking about coaching as being supportive and guiding teachers in their practice, that was something that felt really supportive. And then lastly, they said, like, what if none of these work because of all the reasons I said about scheduling difficulties and not being able, technology doesn't work sometimes. Zoom call never happened, it was supposed to. That they thought of ideas and ways that they could connect with the teacher and review products. So observe what the teacher is working on. Could they look at the lesson plan, an activity matrix to see if they are embedding any of those social opportunities? Could they review the visuals that the teacher is working on to see if there are ways to improve and provide that supportive feedback to teachers, and any ideas? I like that, Adrian, you said, like, we were trying to be really supportive, but we can still provide feedback to do that little push to make sure that teachers are continuing to implement those best practices for young children. And so this to me represents all those ways that we can still complete a focused observation, but it's gonna feel very different than what we're used to. If we're used to going in a classroom and I'm sitting down and I'm a coach, and I'm in the classroom, I have my practice that I know what I want to, observe, that rethinking is going to be kind of the first place for starting. If you haven't coached virtually, that's a really great place to start, of what are the ways you can complete a focused observation, knowing that it's going to vary from teacher to teacher and from site to site.
Hey, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of questions that are about the security and confidentiality issues around either observations or via Zoom or sending videos.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that at all?
I can speak a little to the sending of videos. I think that's something that I gained experience with doing distance coaching. So if you've done distance coaching, it's not the same as this remote coaching that we find ourselves in. But having those conversations with teachers about confidentiality and finding secure ways to share videos is very important. And there are free platforms that are available for uploading and sharing videos. So I'm most familiar with Coaching Companion. And so that's the one I would speak to, as far as having teachers upload a recorded video in which it's a password protected site, and only the people within the collaborative partnership can view that video. It cannot be downloaded, which that seems to ease some teachers kind of, and their real worries about confidentiality. And I now have recorded video of children, and is it able to be shared and downloaded? So taking the time to invest in the research of what programs have access to as far as sharing videos. If your program has shared networks that can be password protected, that's another way that I know programs have use of Box That's password protection, and only the people like the coach and the teacher practitioner have access to a shared box file. Those are safe and secure, but that's definitely something to address. And it helps build that collaborative partnership because it shows respect for children, for families, and for the teacher's privacy. And your other question, repeat the other question.
No, that really got at the issues.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
And there are so many that we could cover. Like this in its whole entirety of how to complete focused observations is kind of its own, we could have a whole webinar on just how to effectively do focused observations in this distance. But I definitely think knowing the procedure, so asking administration and teachers, am I as the coach able to join a lesson, and knowing this was your other question, safety procedure. So there are ways to make Zoom calls on Microsoft Duo and Google, all those platforms, using those passwords and making sure as a coach that you're honoring the safety procedures that exist, that the program is using. I think is really important to making sure that when you're entering those live classrooms that you're protecting the privacy of, and not sharing links or popping in the wrong classroom, just making sure that everyone is good with your access as a coach to both live lessons and recordings. But those are really good questions, and I think those are important considerations that we haven't had to think about as coaches before. And so the fact that we have questions makes me glad. So this question, but what about the teapot and tippy toes? This is probably one of the most frequent questions that we've been receiving. I say we, the National Center for Pyramid Model, as well as just coaches that we're out supporting, is this question and wondering. I'm so used to administering the teapot and tippy toes to help inform implementation of the pyramid model. I'm so used to using it to help us develop shared goals and action planning, or it's part of my work contract or my agency plan that I have to give the teapot, to gather baseline data to show teacher growth and practitioner growth. So we have lots of questions about what do I do about the teapot and tippy toes when I'm a coach remote and the teacher is remote? And the answer is different than the one that Adrian gave when the teacher is in the classroom. So the teapot and the tippy toes should not be administered in this virtual learning setting. The teapot and tippy toes are classroom-based observations meant to observe key pyramid model practices delivered in a classroom with the teacher present in the classroom and children present in the classroom. And so those observations cannot happen in this kind of virtual learning environment. Completing the observations while teachers are delivering remote instruction will not provide you with the information needed to help guide pyramid model implementation and develop action plans with teachers. So this is a question that's come up, and that what we do want to say is that if there are not information available, so you don't have access to the teapot or tippy toes. And as a coach, I was very used to using teapot data, teapot assessments to guide action planning with teachers. Is it easier if you're used to that practice? Of course, I will not, I can't gloss over that. But in the absence of the teapot or tippy toes data, Adrian really described this well, that we need to be using all available needs assessment data to help develop those shared goals and action plans and guide implementation. And one of the ways, and we're going to share a resource that's newly developed that we hope will, it does not take the place of the teapot. That's my first disclaimer. It's meant to be a support, a coaching tool, a resource for classroom practitioners who are in this virtual learning and for coaches. So this pyramid model practices for virtual learning is something we'll share. This handout is available on the webinar registration page. So as an additional resource, you'll find it here. So this checklist was developed to be a guide for teachers and a guide for coaches that really looks at what are those essential social emotional practices that align with virtual learning that we might expect teachers to implement and we could expect children to benefit from in this virtual learning environment. So we're going to unpack and look at that document more in depth in a moment. But you might also have additional needs assessment data that you're completing. We have the pyramid model practices implementation checklist. Adrian referenced those. We often use them in practices training around the pyramid model. They're a great tool, a needs assessment tool where teachers can identify their strengths. And they can also identify information where they want or need more support in. If you're used to using Teapot or Tippy Toe's data to help teachers plan goals, we can still have teachers reflect. And I think that's key if we talk about shared goals. And as Adrian said, teachers following teachers' lead. The teacher goal planning form is a form, it's linked as a resource. This form asks teachers, what are your strengths? What can you identify in the pyramid model that you already are doing well? And what are those 2 or 3 areas that you want to learn more about or to improve in your practice? And so that's going to be a really critical point of collecting data, that you're getting that teacher input. And then as we're coaching, we're always completing observations. So we're going to have our information and data that we've gathered from the observations that we have completed so far with the teachers as we get to know them and are maybe being part of their virtual lessons or viewing recorded lessons that can help us in this goal setting and can help guide this coaching in this virtual environment. So here is this pyramid model practices for virtual learning. This checklist, it's set up as a checklist, I should say that, will look familiar as you're glancing at it. And if you're familiar with pyramid model practices, it highlights those critical elements within the pyramid model that might align with or we'd want to see in a virtual lesson or a recorded lesson that's being shared with families. So the checklist has information about responsive relationships, schedules and routines, rules for the virtual learning environment, engagement, and then it has information about social emotional teaching on emotions, on friendship, on problem solving. And then it has information that a lot of coaches and teachers have been asking about. What do I do about responding to challenging behavior in a kind of live lesson, and the kind of the unique things that might be happening during some of those live lessons and how we can respond. So there's ideas for responding to challenging behavior. And then the last section in the checklist is about supporting and engaging families. And so if you think about it, these are the many key elements of the pyramid model. But as we take a deeper look at the checklist, what we see are things that if we're implementing the pyramid model, they're going to sound very familiar, but there's information that can help guide teachers and it can help guide us as coaches in supporting teachers in using these practices. So if we take a look at this emotions, if you haven't seen this resource, this is probably the first time it's being shared. And so we're really excited about it. And this really helped me support coaches and think about, that was kind of the number one, doing some backpedaling here of kind of the rationale for creating this document, that coaches want to support teachers right now, but often didn't know what that looked like or what were those critical things that they could be supporting teachers and implementing around the promotion of social and emotional learning right now. And so these are kind of elements that a teacher could put in place in virtual or whatever those kind of remote learning environments look like right now. So for examples in emotions, you'll see that there's teaching of self-regulation and teaching emotions and recognizing emotions, but there's additional information that make them fit and align better in that virtual environment. So things like develop scenarios around self-regulation that fit at home, talk about emotions that children might be experiencing while at home. So things like boredom, frustration, excitement, annoyed, Those are emotions that might not be high priority if you were in the classroom setting, but if children are home and they're away from their peers and they're at home with their family doing virtual learning, they might be experiencing boredom, they might be frustrated, they might be excited, but we're teaching just some ideas of how to extend that. In virtual learning, there's examples about the teacher talking about their own emotional responses at home or in the community. So making instruction kind of connect to where children are, which is in their home and in their community, not necessarily in the classroom setting. And then the elements, as you go through the checklist, there's examples for what might be provided to families. So ideas for material provision, and all of those orange links that you see are hyperlinked. So if you're using this checklist and you're a coach and you want to provide a resource that's linked here, all of those links take you directly to that particular resource. And this checklist was designed to be used as a needs assessment and also a coaching tool. So as a coach, one of the things we told as we're supporting coaches is share this with the teacher. They could either complete the checklist in its entirety, or you could just focus on schedules and routines with your teacher. So break it down into sections and have the teacher use it as a needs assessment, indicate the items that they're doing well in virtual learning and indicate the areas where they might need support or help from. So it could be used in that way where the coach and the teacher are indicating needs and strengths, but it also is a coaching tool that as you're getting ready to develop shared goals and action plans, that you can get some ideas for how to support teachers in implementing these practices. So we just have a couple sample goals that look at responsive relationships with something that teachers may be working on, and just some ideas of how those, we work on responsive relationships in classrooms, what that might look like in a virtual setting. So this teacher's goal was, I will build strong relationships with the children during virtual lessons. And there was 4 steps to her action plan: greeting children by name, starting the call with a virtual greeting. We do that in the classroom, maybe in our first morning circle. We can replicate that practice in our virtual meetings, providing descriptive feedback to at least 5 children, using a class roster to mark when I have positive interactions, and making sure all children are receiving attention and feedback. So the action plans that we're developing while we're supporting teachers in this virtual learning have the same key elements, but they're going to look and feel very different in their implementation. Here's another sample action plan. This teacher was working on schedules and routines, and so the coach and the teacher used some of those elements from that checklist to come up with how would the teacher work on the practices around a schedule for virtual circle. Something that the teacher was using when she was teaching in person, but how could that teacher implement those same strategies to support children in her virtual lessons? So just things, again, really highlight those key practices, but doing things like emailing family a set of the visual schedules might be something the teacher hasn't done before, but was very supportive if the children were going to access that recorded circle time at a later time, something that was really helpful in children understanding the schedule and routine of their virtual lessons. So as we're thinking about our coaching strategies, we just want to really emphasize that some strategies are going to work better if you're live in person than if you were completing observations in a virtual setting. So this is just my illustration. I'm such a visual person. I like to see things laid out. So this is a coaching log. This coaching log is one that we use and have coaches track their coaching time and the coaching strategies that they're using to inform their coaching. Again, we're using data to form our decisions around coaching. But you can see if a coach is watching a recording session as her focused observation, that the observation strategies might be limited. She's observing and she's collecting data. If that same coach is doing a debriefing meeting, there might be, and Adrienne had some really good examples you might incorporate more coaching strategies into your reflection and feedback meetings to be able to do things like role play, do demonstrations, have more reflective conversations, because you might not have been able to do some of those additional coaching strategies during the focused observation. And the last, and Adrian touched on a lot of these, so I'm just going to review a couple that seem really important as we go through, is to really, and Adrian, I can't say enough, using technology to our advantage. If we're going to refocus and be positive about some of the situations, I think helping teachers viewing a recorded lesson or finding the time to have the teacher watch their video and watch their practice and share successes and invite that teacher to recognize something they've implemented with success in a virtual learning environment is something that we should be doing and celebrating teachers in all that they're trying to implement. So that's something as we're engaging in reflection and feedback, and we're having these Zoom meetings and it's just you and the teacher, and you're on a computer or you're on the phone and you're having these meetings, it's a way to really connect and celebrate and offer your support as a coach. And then I think the last thing is just to be really creative with your material provision. So Adrian shared a great coaching resource, but as a coach, we can maybe step back and think ahead and anticipate what resources families and children might need and be ready to share and collaborate with teachers on resources. So this is another resource that we wanted to highlight. This is also linked, the link to the Barton Lab is on the webinar registration page. That's a hard one to say. So these resources really highlight promoting social skills during virtual learning. You couldn't get a more, I think, aligned resource to what we're talking about. That as coaches, we coaching in the pyramid model, there are strategies and support we can help teachers kind of understand and use. So these are great resources, not only to share with teachers, but also get ideas as coaches, because we have to also reframe our mind and thinking, what are those pyramid model practices that we can still implement and focus on in that virtual learning. So between the new virtual pyramid model practices and some of these additional resources that we've linked, we're hoping that maybe people came with new ideas and ways to really connect with thinking about the pyramid model and coaching in this virtual world.
So I'm going to jump in here and just answer a couple of questions really quickly. So there were a couple of questions about Teapot and Tippy Toes, and I put the link to the Tippy Toes in the Q&A box. But the Tippy Toes is the classroom observation tool for infant toddler classrooms, and the Teapots for pre-K classrooms. And questions that you have about training on those tools, you can go to the Brooks Publishing Company website, because that's where those tools are posted or are sold, and they coordinate the training. But then there were a few questions, and we just have a minute. So I'm just going to kind of give you real quickly. So if you haven't been trained on the Teapot or Tippy Toes, or if you don't have access to those tools, Adrian and Megan both referred on an earlier slide to some checklists that we have that are available, and those are available on the challengingbehavior.org website as well. So there are tools you can use more informally if you don't have access to the Teapot or Tippy Toes. Anyway, we're out of time. I want to say thank you to Megan and Adrian. That was fabulous. There's never enough time. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Amel, and thank you to our panelists for their wonderful insights and to our attendees for their thoughtful questions. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. The certificate of attendance will appear once you submit your survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, and download our pyramid model resources, and more. And finally, I want to thank our funder for making this webinar possible. This now concludes our webinar. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.